France betrays America against Donald Trump. Global insights again. The transatlantic relationship is at a critical juncture. President Donald Trump has launched a trade war with Europe, leaving longtime U.S. allies reeling. Some leaders are taking this opportunity to stake their claim to Europe's leadership role. French President Emmanuel Macron is urging EU countries to stop buying American defense equipment and instead buy French and European goods. He has also planned to deploy French nuclear weapons in Germany, taking over Europe's shield before Berlin can play that role. Not to be outdone, Germany is on a massive military spending spree to equip its army with more armored vehicles, more air defense batteries, more warships, more spy satellites, and key technologies like radar, radio jammers, and artificial intelligence. The motivation behind Germany's multi-billion-dollar spending spree is clear. As the U.S. changes course under President Donald Trump, Europe must achieve strategic independence from its once closest ally across the Atlantic. We've often asked whether Europe can defend itself without the U.S. security umbrella, but in today's video, we're asking the opposite question. What would America lose if it divorced Europe? The first thing America could lose is its counterweight to China. Mr. Trump declared that Europe must take care of itself. The U.S. will not take it all on anymore, because Washington has its own internal problems to worry about, as well as focusing on dealing with its biggest rival, China. However, going it alone in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific is quite a risky business. Let's try to compare GDP by purchasing power parity, which is arguably the best measure when we think about domestic hot goods production. In 2024, America's net worth will be $29.2 trillion. China's $37.1 trillion. The good news for Washington is that its East Asian allies remain along the Pacific, Japan with $6.6 trillion, South Korea with $3.3 trillion, and Taiwan, the main target of any potential conflict, with $1.8 trillion. That puts the alliance's cash flow ahead of China's, but not ahead. In this situation, what would be more useful for Washington? What if there was an additional $28 trillion in the pool? That's what the European Union could contribute. The good news for the United States is that Europe has reason to care about East Asian security. It also needs a steady supply of semiconductors from Taiwan, and the Netherlands is deeply embedded in that supply chain, with ASML holding a monopoly on the EUV lithography machines essential for advanced semiconductor manufacturing. The bad news is that Brussels' interests in East Asia may not run as deep as Washington's. That is, European politicians may be willing to support Asia as much as they like under certain circumstances, but reaching a consensus may require some risk-taking. But that would be difficult if the two sides of the Atlantic were to break up completely. The second most important thing the U.S. could lose is its military bases. Did you know that the U.S. likes to show off its power with aircraft carriers? That's why there are currently 11 aircraft carriers in service, and the USS John F. Kennedy is expected to be delivered by the end of this year. However, they are expensive items, and it takes time to deploy them where they are needed. There's also about 24% of the time spent on maintenance. Wouldn't it be nice to have land-based aircraft carriers available to some extent? Well, the U.S. has them. In fact, there are about 30 of them in Europe alone. These are called bases, and are something that European countries tend to be happy to host because they help improve their overall security. It's a win-win situation. For example, in 2001, the U.S. launched its attack on Afghanistan. The only way to get into Afghanistan in just 26 days was through American bases in Europe. What started the war was the third airlift in history. Meanwhile, other bases provided services that time cannot replace. Take the Pytuvik space base in northwest Greenland, the remote, semi-autonomous Danish island that Mr. Trump has insisted on buying. Despite its name, it is not a space base for the U.S. to launch satellites. Instead, it houses the advanced warning equipment of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Without it, the U.S. has given Russia a little more reason to think about a surprise nuclear attack. There is no denying that the U.S. benefits from the strategic geography of its partner countries. All because those countries do not think that the U.S. will exploit its bases in these countries to their detriment. The third important thing that the U.S. can lose is intelligence sharing. Certainly, the U.S. spends a huge amount of money on intelligence activities. This figure has been increasing every year from $63.5 billion in 2005 to $106.3 billion in 2024. However, the capabilities of an individual country still have certain limits. That is the main reason why the U.S. is part of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance with the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. To understand these benefits, consider the United Kingdom. Once upon a time, the sun never set on the British Empire. Although the country exited the imperial game decades ago, its intelligence infrastructure remains widespread across the Commonwealth. Europe provides a broader, deeper intelligence reach than the U.S. can provide on its own. Indeed, think of the depth of French intelligence in the Francophone world, especially in Africa. Or all the members of NATO in Eastern Europe and their historical ties to Moscow and the Russian-speaking world. To know what happens when intelligence is cut off, ask the Ukrainian president after the White House raid. It's a shame, but now it's time to move on to number 4. The weapons network. Once upon a time, NATO built its reputation for collective defense by stipulating that an attack on one was an attack on all. But the more effective trick may be to create the world's most powerful hot goods network. From ammunition to artillery and beyond, NATO's standardization policies mean that German, French, British, and other toys are compatible with American ones. What benefits does the U.S. get? For starters, Europe is a lucrative export market. The Trump administration complains that Americans have been robbed of manufacturing jobs for half a century. But it fails to point out that hot flash manufacturing is a sector that has never been outsourced on national security grounds. As a result, it is the Europeans who have favored high-paying blue-collar jobs in the United States. Who else could it be? More importantly, large orders allow the U.S. to invest more in research and development and produce goods that would not have been possible if only the U.S. Armed Forces had ordered them. In addition, building compatible systems means that stocks of materials such as 155mm ammunition will be available in Europe. In an emergency, they could be shipped across the Atlantic. For now, Mr. Trump is right. He says that Europe is falling behind on its target of spending 2% of GDP on defense. Only 23 of NATO's 32 members will meet the target by 2024. But the truth is that 2% is no longer enough. As Europe increases its spending on rearmament, the U.S. could be the beneficiary by selling toys to its partners. But things don't seem to be going that way. The moves by France and Germany are worrying signs. Anyway, moving on to point 5, which is the right to hold the handle. Let me give you an example to make it easier to understand. If the warring parties can accept the expected outcome of a conflict, then it is more likely that a peace agreement will be reached around that outcome because both sides will benefit from not having to bear the costs of war. However, within that scope, the two sides are diametrically opposed to reaching any agreement. One way to think about the current transatlantic situation is that the Trump administration doesn't care about what gets done. Instead, the goal is simply to maximize the likelihood of a deal, even if there may be some uncertainty about the scope. Meanwhile, Europe is adamant that Ukraine get the best deal possible. Trump is trying to set the agenda by talking to the Russian side while Europe is clearly being left out. Europe sees this as crossing the line of what is acceptable. In fact, the U.S. is very confident in its power. So let's see if Europe can come up with an alternative, like deploying a peacekeeping force in Ukraine, for example, and how it will be built. The sixth thing we turn to is the economic issue, which is the U.S. debt. This may sound dry, but remember that debt is what allows the U.S. to maintain its current high military spending. The U.S. national debt is now over $36 trillion. In 2024, the government budget deficit is $1.833 trillion. Defense spending is $84 billion, the second largest budget item after the $1.5 trillion spent on Social Security. But that's okay, because they have an endless supply of lenders willing to bid for U.S. Treasury bonds. Thankfully, the greenback is the world's reserve currency. Foreigners who want to hold something relatively stable, other than gold, can think of U.S. dollars. Similarly, if a government wanted to hold a reserve currency, the majority of it would be the U.S. dollar. Indeed, by 2024, it would account for about 58% of the EU's total reserves, establishing the euro as a credible equivalent. But the dollar has never faced a real transatlantic challenge. That's because the EU is perfectly happy with the current situation. But what about the future? And don't forget that Russia and China are also trying to replace the dollar. And don't forget that the seventh U.S. interest that could be affected is the seventh leverage of sanctions. As mentioned, the U.S. dollar's role as the world's central currency gives Washington enormous leverage over the global financial system. The U.S. can freeze out countries it doesn't like. And behind the scenes, potential target countries will be so wary of the economic consequences of sanctions that they will be reluctant to take a path that would displease the U.S. But what if Washington loses control of the global financial system? All of this illustrates the complexity of geopolitics. Globalization, multipolarity, and the increasingly intertwined interests between countries and regions have made Europe no longer the priority and sole concern of the U.S. Therefore, the tendency of the connection between the two sides of the Atlantic to become increasingly stretched is inevitable. However, no country, no matter how powerful the world is, can do without allies. Both the US and Europe need each other. What do you think? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this video helpful. Now, goodbye, and see you again.